Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hello Word, your daily dose of English vocabulary. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're diving into a word that describes something that happens after a while. Eventually. Eventually means in the end or at a later time. We use it when something takes time to happen or develop. It suggests a process or a wait. For example, after many attempts, he eventually passed his driving test.
See?
It took him several tries, but he succeeded in the end. Let's look at some synonyms. A close synonym for eventually is ultimately. You might say, ultimately, she wants to become a doctor. Another good synonym is finally. You can say, he worked hard and finally achieved his goal.
We can also use in the end.
For example, in the end, they decided to go to the beach. Another suitable synonym is sooner or later. For instance, sooner or later, you'll have to face the truth. One more synonym is in time. You could say, in time, everything will be all right. Now, let's explore some antonyms of eventually, words that mean the opposite. An antonym for eventually is immediately. You could say, she responded immediately to the email. Another antonym is instantly. For example, the coffee gave him energy instantly. We can also use straight away. For instance, he left straight away after the meeting. Another antonym is at once. You might say, do your homework at once. We could also use right away. For instance, I need that report right away. These words suggest that something happens without any delay, which is the opposite of eventually. Now, let's see how we can use eventually in everyday conversations. Imagine you're talking about learning a new skill. You could say, it takes time, but eventually you'll get the hang of it. Or perhaps you are discussing a difficult situation. You could say, eventually, things will get better. If you are giving advice, you might say, keep practicing, and eventually you'll succeed. These are just a few examples of how you can incorporate eventually into your daily conversations. Let's look at some more example sentences. If you keep practicing, you'll eventually master the guitar. The rain stopped, and eventually the sun came out. They eventually found the missing keys under the sofa. He eventually apologized for his mistake. She eventually realized that he was right. The children eventually fell asleep after a long day. We eventually arrived at the airport at 3 p.m. after several delays. The company eventually went bankrupt after years of poor management. She eventually got used to living in a new country. He eventually learned to speak fluent Spanish. It might be difficult now, but eventually it will be worth it. They argued for hours, but eventually they reached an agreement. The problem seemed impossible at first, but we eventually found a solution. Even though it was difficult, he eventually climbed the mountain. The caterpillar eventually transformed into a beautiful butterfly. The doctor said he would eventually recover from his illness. The snow eventually melted in the spring. After years of searching, they eventually found their dream home. The old house was eventually renovated. I eventually understood the complicated instructions. Okay, let's recap. Eventually means in the end or at a later time. We covered synonyms like ultimately, finally, in the end, sooner or later, and in time. We also learned antonyms such as immediately, instantly, straight away, at once, and right away. And we saw how to use eventually in everyday conversations and example sentences. That's all for today's episode of Hello Word.
Thank you for joining me.
Before you go, please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Your support helps others find the show. Also, I'd love to see how you use eventually. Create your own sentence using eventually and share it as a comment below the video. Keep practicing, and I'll see you in the next episode.